Welcome, Mark. Welcome back. This is a hard part, and that's why I'm stammering, because now we look at Mark and perhaps how he undid himself career-wise. And this was actually it was a year ago with the Deputy President at his residence in Karen. And this, I would say, generally was described as a train wreck. This was just part of it. The voices of people talking about you losing some favor or support in certain regions.
When I spoke today, I was basically retracing that step. You know, there are newcomers into the scene who think that when we sat down with Uhuru Kenyatta, I told him that I'm going to support you for 10 years and then you will support me for 10 years. That was never the discussion, my friend.
You never at once in any one of your campaigns did you say that you'll be in power for 20 years as Jubilee? Are you saying that's not the case,
Just relax. Listen to me. When we sat down with Uhuru Kenyatta, it was never about me supporting Uhuru Kenyatta so that he can support me. It was never. Let me tell you, Mark. I supported Uhuru Kenyatta not because he came from Central Kenya. I supported Uhuru Kenyatta because I knew him and I knew his capacity to lead. And when the time comes, right, for me to run, if Jubilee nominates me, I am not going to run on the basis that because I supported Uhuru Kenyatta.
I tell you something, it's quite hard watching it, being on this other side, watching that particular interview. It was quite the experience carrying it out, and I would do it again if given the opportunity. Would I do it the same way? Let's first throw it to the panel, and I'll start with my senior. And I told them, be candid, this is peer review, not just for my benefit, but for the entire, fraternity, media fraternity, because we all get these interviews when they decide that we deserve an exclusive. I'll start with you, Masharia.
It's a hard one. Eh?
No. Go for it. Go for it. I can take this.
Yeah. I think I thought you tried your best to push him, but William Ruto is a very difficult person to push. He comes very well prepared. He is very good at evasion. He is very good at flat denials, even when the facts are staring you in the face. And how you think you could have done better is come with clips of his own words. Because on some of the things which he's flatly denying, he must be on record somewhere saying it in public. Mm-hmm. But the tricky bit is sometimes it is not him. It is acolytes saying it. Yeah. He's at a rally, or guys are at a rally, and they are speaking, saying this and that in regard to him. For instance, about Uhuru will serve for 10 years, yes, and then Ruto will serve for 10 years, and you know that agreement. But sometimes it might not be him who said it, but his people are saying it. That he wants to serve for 10 years is not in dispute. The question is that, was there an agreement that Uhuru will support him? The tapes are there.
Yes.
I think you could have done better on that. Within and so on and so forth. But when he sits there and says he has no problem with rail line, he supports the 100%. Tell us another one.
There's a tricky balance, and I'll sit in your class any day to be taught again to have a refresher course, Christine. Because between follow-ups, yes, which we're accused of, not doing follow-ups in an interview, as well as, pushing harder. So either if you don't do a follow-up, you're told you're sanitizing. If you push hard, then you're told you're working for the other team. Kind of the kieleweke tanga binary divide.
You did well to listen to him when he said, listen to me.
I didn't have a choice, I was his resident.
Because then you give him an opportunity to pour out what it is. But then now you need to take that as your ammunition. Look, anytime you interview, especially a high-profile subject, who knows his stuff well, and who knows he's going to come to face a lot of arrows, you need to be very strategic in how you do this interview. You must outwit him. So you must listen to what he's saying and take it and throw it back at him. You must also listen to what he says, go to the side a little bit. You don't need to do the follow-up right away. Go to the side of it and go to some other subject. Come back to it. But you must be very clever in the language, the way you phrase the same question. If you watched the Deputy President's interview with Stephen Saka on BBC, the same question kept coming up about 4 times, which to this day, he didn't respond to. And that's because he's very bright, he's listening to you intently, trying to see what is it that you're trying to get him to say. And when he doesn't want to say it, he won't. He will actually look for a way to drift you away from that interview. I want to take you to your interview, you know, the panel of journalists that were interviewing the president
in December.
And talking about this contract. You probably needed to now do a story on that contract, or what is known of that contract, and establish as much as you can. Because right now we are holding you very irresponsible. We're saying, you know, maybe you are given and you didn't give us.
Yeah.
You didn't tell us.
Which
perhaps, perhaps. Maybe this is a moment when you
Yes.
need to now come clean with everyone. And you know, you need to tell us why it is important for us to actually see that contract and know the contents of it. He talked about public resources having been used as security for this contract. How true is that? Where is the suspicion coming from that public resources have been used to secure these loans? Where is that coming from?
Yes.
You know, they always say that where there's a smoke, there's some fire down there somewhere. So at some point, that fire ought to just explode, so that we start to hear about it. So when you who are in the media are bringing in a subject, you need to study that subject over a period of time to know how he conducts himself, how he outwits people, so that you come and get smarter than him.
Right.
But I think you're all taking it for granted just because you're a journalist. You think, oh, he's going to come here and he's going to respond to my questions. He won't. I won't do the same. I mean, I'll come prepared because I know you have everything you want to unearth about me, everything that I want to.
Depends on who you're interviewing and the purpose of that interview. If you got an opportunity to interview Bill Gates or Jack Ma, people regard this person as somebody with a lot of knowledge and experience that you want to get. So that the tone of your interview is more of trying to draw out the wisdom from his actions and what he's doing. If on the other hand you're interviewing a Kenyan politician, I don't think they should be given as much leeway as you would give Jack Ma, okay? Because we know our leaders and we know our politicians. And in Kenya, I feel that we don't have enough interviewers who push hard. And therefore, if you distinguish yourself as somebody who pushes hard, to me, it is a really positive thing.
Absolutely.
Because you find so many people who sit there and say, yes, and you know the interview time is getting finished, and,
that's the reason
the
why
viewer
you're doing the interview,
is not
to push
getting the value of what you're saying. So interviewing is an art that you should then first know your audience and then know the person you're interviewing. In this particular case, you know, he kept repeating that there was no such arrangement that I should support and he should support. But I remember seeing very many times pictures or clips of the president standing on top of his Land Cruiser saying nitafanya miaka yangu 10 alafu William akuja afanye miaka yake 10. So already it was in public record that even if it is not the DP who stated it, the president himself had stated it. I will do my 10 years, William will do his 10 years. Which goes back then to the issue of you being prepared and saying, okay, then it didn't come from you, but here is a clip from the president. Therefore, it is almost the same thing. What is your reaction? So I think, you know, you're distinguishing yourself, and keep it up. I'm happy that I contributed to your
Again, I haven't lobbied for any positives.
Don't hammer them.
Okay.
Coax them
Okay.
into saying what it is that you actually intend for them to say.
All right. I have a feeling he wants to say something negative,
Okay,
so let me give it to Lydia.
Let me pick from where he's left. What is the objective of the interview? here's my, I mean, there's a lot of talk about the deputy president, evading and I think then it means that you're moving into this interview with an assumption that the deputy president has something to hide, or that he will lie, and I think maybe those assumptions require to be interrogated. Are we going to these interviews with very deep-seated assumptions which might not even be accurate? That's one. Two.
Hence the gotcha kind of.
Hence the gotcha, like, yeah. Then also, is this war? Is there somebody who is going to win and somebody is going to lose? What's this competitive approach to this conversation? Because in my view, you're supposed to get the best out of him for your audience. So it's not about who's going to win, who's going to lose. It's about you getting for your audience the objective that you had intended. And so I would be very cautious about using language that would imply that the deputy president has something to hide. He is stating facts as he knows them, as he believes them. Now, on the question, and again, to emphasize on the issue of assumptions, the deputy president is repeating, and he's saying that there is no such conversation that they had with His Excellency, the president. Now, there is what you have assumed that this is the truth. Fine. Does truth evolve? Is it possible that now he no longer holds the president to that, promise, or he no longer holds the president to that announcement? Is that has the truth evolved? Are we open-minded enough to appreciate when truth evolves, so that then we are able to counter our own assumptions? And I think if then you're able to move into an interview with that level of open-mindedness, you'll be able to find a path to the truth that you can guide your audience and even your interviewee towards.
Yes.
So in essence, we are saying there is current truth, there is past truth, perhaps there will be future truth of what it is that I'm going to be feeling is my truth, in the next 2 weeks. That is why they
say the truth is relative.
You are talking about the campaign promises that people made.
Yes.
And you want to hold them to account. Surely, I think you must be firm and say, you promised this and this and this and this and that. Why haven't you done it? There is no other way to do it. There is no polite way.
As you answer this and as we conclude this point, as we conclude this, are we there yet? Are we there generally across the board? You watch the news.
We have some way to go. We can do better.
Yes.
And there's one thing which disturbed me about that interview: the number of times you said "sir." As a journalist, and this is what I always tell my mentees and the people I've worked with: never bow down to a news subject, whether it is at an interview like that one or even in any other gathering. Never call anybody sir. We never do that. We never do that.
Sir is a sign of respect.
Yes, sir.
Come on.
Okay,
maybe if it is said once for the record, but
with all due respect,
with all due respect, all those things you can say, but when you say sir every 5 minutes, there's a problem, because you're already giving that person the upper hand.
Okay.
No,
and yet when you sit on that, panel,
deputy president of
even
the
let me tell you,
Republic.
even the president, even the queen,
you
when you sit on the same interview table,
I don't think
you are supposed to be talking as equals. Otherwise, there is no point in doing it, because then it can be done by his presidential press service. As simple as that.
With the many stars and so on. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like a sign of absolute submission.
No, then,
I mean, you can say it once, but not many times.
There's always room for follow-ups. On this particular interview, Mr. Ruto, Dr. Ruto, made some very categorical statements that by the end of this year, SGR
would have made this
will be paying for itself. And by next year, it will be paying back the loan, so we won't. So you have a job.
These are the things
to look at those accounts.
And follow-up isn't just there at the sitting, but even afterwards.
No, later on.
After you've digested.
And also the other issue of the president's promise on the
SGR contract.
On the contract. I think we still deserve a story, or our readers still deserve a story on your efforts so far to get that contract and where they have failed. And I think the next step is for you and the Nation Media Group to seek that contract through the Access to Information Act.
Yes.
Go to court and ask for it.
I was about to say yes, sir. Let's move
Mark,
on to this
don't go
other
there,
subject
don't go
because
there.
it's something we have to discuss. This
Yeah.
story was done by The Star and is actually this past week, and it's headed here. I think you can see what I'm looking at if you can mirror it to my director. Revealed, Sonko was released from prison over HIV status, and it's there for you to see. Nairobi Governor Mike Mbuvi Sonko was released from prison 3 months before completing his 1-year sentence because he was HIV positive, documents show. This particular document that has been quoted is actually a judgment. And so you'll have your time to read this whole article, and I'd want us to respond to this. And I'll start with someone who was the managing editor at The Star himself. First of all, would you do a story or allow this story to go to print as a managing editor at The Star?
No.
And did you follow up with whoever is responsible now?
Did I follow?
Yes. In this particular instance.
Well, I did make inquiries.
Yes.
And I spoke to 2 editors at The Star. One felt it was a wrong decision. The other felt it was justified.
We need to know why you wouldn't carry the story.
Yes, in fact, let me get into that. Number one,
I'm waiting for
there
the
are 2
disclaimer.
issues. Huh?
Yes.
There are 2 issues. There is a disclaimer is that
Yes.
I am a minister or a CEC in Sonko's government, so I am affiliated to him, and I was the former managing editor at The Star.
Good.
So I am right in the middle, smack in the middle of this thing.
Absolutely.
But there are
Interested
2
party.
principles here that we should look at. Number one is that what is submitted in court is privileged. And therefore, it is the commonly held view that anything that is said in court can be published. Number 2, there is the ethical issues that come even highlighted in the code of conduct about, discussing somebody's medical condition.
Yes.
And so on. So when I think those 2 issues came, we used to be told in journalism school, the first thing is what is news, and then you start defining that news is a message encoded by a sender through a medium to a recipient who decodes it, and then there is feedback. But my favorite definition of what is news is that news is whatever the editor decides is news. Okay? So in this case, the editor weighed the issue of the privilege, and he weighed the issue of the ethical considerations and decided that the privilege will prevail. And therefore decided that the ethical considerations are probably important, but not as important, and took the decision that because it is allowed in law, therefore we shall do it. But then some questions then arise. Did the editor verify whether this document is genuine?
Yes.
Because the moment you have decided to publish it, it is your responsibility, the onus is on you then to be able to verify whether it is true. This document had been doing the rounds on social media for a pretty long time.
Yes.
And the more reason why it even needed verification. I'm sure other media houses had seen it before, but they had not decided to publish it. But just the last point, I have seen, there has been a response to this story, including a threat to go to court, okay? And I had before tried to look at the reason why some media houses, especially the small ones, are struggling. And of course, apart from the fact that the big boys like The Nation and the Standard have a lot of the advertising and the small ones are struggling to get it, there was an avalanche of court cases against the media. And court cases are not cheap, Mark. Even if you win eventually, all those court appearances and paying lawyers is really draining. And when you get a judgment like the one the former judge, sorry, I forgot his name, was awarded. If you slap Nation Media Group with a fine of 23 million shillings,
Yes.
they might feel a little shake, but move on. But if you slap a small media house with the 23 million shillings, it becomes a real problem for their finances.
Yeah.
Now imagine you have like 12 or 13 or 14 such cases that are facing you, so that you begin to ask yourself now, is this an existential issue? Yes, you have to assert yourself and your independence and not be bullied and do what you have to do. But if you are not there tomorrow, then that independence is even irrelevant.
This was actually supposedly a judgment by Justice Oguk, but something that you quoted earlier, that it is privilege. If this particular case was tried in open, it was open trial. It's And the publishing of this, if it is indeed credible, it would be, there's nothing wrong with publishing. It should be in public domain.
It should be, but that is
nothing
why I'm
wrong
saying
with
it should have been the responsibility of the person to check. But I say it again, close to that, is that there is the issue that this was somebody's personal medical records, which brings the issue of ethics. So now the person had to weigh between the privilege and the ethics and decided to go with the privilege.
Right.
But here comes then the other question.
Here's my view
Lydia,
of-
and then Christy.
on this issue of, first of all, I sympathize with Sonko and the fact that his HIV status, if we were to believe the document, is out here. I think everybody deserves the right to disclose their health issues at their convenience.
Yes.
And he should have been allowed the time to come clean or to come to the public if he so wished. But that said, I hope he's getting the care that he requires. In the meantime,
assuming it is,
assuming that,
yes.
that it is correct, I see two things. I would have read the story, but I would have changed the title, because there is the issue of him being a convict, and then there are the health concerns. Now, I've seen a lot of reporting where we speak about the health concerns of very many leaders. Half the time, or most of the time, we really do not disclose what illness they are suffering from, because I think that is really within the realm of their private space,
yes.
and respecting the person and the family. And so I wouldn't have led with the issue of his health. It's okay to disclose to Nairobians that your governor is having health issues in case you don't see him, then you know what he might be having a problem with. But it is not in public interest to tell us which illness he's suffering from. And so I would have led more with the issue of being a convict, because right there is the issue that would be of public interest. Because the constitution or some many laws which say that you cannot be in public office if you have been convicted for a crime that requires you to serve a jail term of more than 6 months. Now that is the issue of public interest. And so for me, the headline would have been about him being a convict as opposed to him having an illness. And so therefore, objective journalism would tell me, if I was to go for this issue of convict, then I would delve backwards into how did we end up here, which parts of our systems are broken so that we ended up with a candidate who is a convict, what steps were not followed or what went wrong, and then try and move society forward in that sense. So I feel like it was not necessary to latch on to the health issue. They should have latched on to the convict issue.
Christy, and then Mashari.
You know, Charles is talking about verifying the fact of the judgment.
Yes.
And I think the judge is a person who lives on this earth, perhaps within the borders of this country. That's a person you'd have still called. And probably you'd have sought some legal advice in terms of how do I approach this? And then why are you telling us that the subject of the story is HIV positive? What do you want me to think? Do you want me to have pity on him? Do you want me to say, serves him right? What do you really want me as a consumer of that piece of information to do? And so I want to go back and say, how are we framing the story? I agree with Lydia when she says, for me, the bigger story was that he was a convict. And I said, that's probably one of the stories I would have wanted to actually, want done, and done well, to show me how, as a voter, if I voted for Governor Sonko, that I probably did not know enough to make my decision about this person that probably I voted for or who got elected into office. And then now there's the bit of we want to just sensationalize every little bit of the leaders that we have, or the people that are prominent, the people who make news. We want to look for what can I touch that is very sensational, so that then I can publish that and make a big headline out of it. First of all, that story, unless you're talking about him being a convict, should not have been a page one story.
Right.
It probably would have put it in a totally different page. Maybe now, I would even have approached it differently and gone and said to Sonko, is it true that you are HIV positive? What would you like to say to people who are living with HIV? Looking at a more positive, encouraging side.
And you can imagine the kind of response
him
you'd
dealing
get.
with this, and you can imagine the kind of influence he would have had.
Yes.
Look at what Professor Nyang' Nyong'o has done. He's really championing this cancer thing. Look at what Beth Mugo has done. They're really championing this. And you see, we don't see their illness as negative. granted that HIV has its own stereotype and so on, and stigma and so on, which is what we have now subjected Sonko to as the media. We've now gone to actually stigmatizing.
Right.
So for me, it's disturbing, the trend of this sensational journalism that we seem to be feeding our audiences. And you know, the more we feed them on sensational journalism, they keep on asking for that sensational bit, because then now they can now put it on their social media platforms and talk
Yes.
about it, you know, outside of the media, and it just gets really, really messy.
Macharia,
If I knew that as a leader had HIV, would I still vote for them? If they were a good leader, I would. It would, their HIV status would have nothing to do with their leadership qualities. But not if they're a convict.
Right.
So you see, it's that weighing of what is of public interest.
Would this story feature in a paper tomorrow if you were the
Let me
editor?
put it this way. When I sat in the news desk and I was brought a story on a case which concluded a week ago, I would automatically spike it unless the reporter can give me a very convincing reason
Yes.
why it is running today and yet it did not run last week when the judgment was delivered. What is it now? Has it been overtaken by events, or is there a more compelling reason that even if we missed it the first time around, now we must run it? That would be the conversation. And that would be the same conversation here. Now you're not talking about a week. You're talking about how many years?
Yes.
Years. That, we then have to look at why now.
Right.
Why now? And of course, there's the whole issue of interrogating that document. Is it genuine? If so, still a question of why now. And if we determine that we must use it because this is a fact which has not yet come out in the public, but it involves a leader, and we know that when a person voluntarily takes a position of leadership, he relinquishes some of his right to privacy. But still, that does not give us the right to go about disclosing
Yes.
somebody's personal medical condition unless there is really a public interest in disclosing that. Because
And if they're
this
the ones
story was
who
about
volunteer.
disclosing that.
Yes.
Unless there is a public interest in disclosing that, or we have his permission to disclose that. Yes, the matter was in court. It was an open court, we presume. But the fact that it was not covered that 5 or how many years ago, you know, that raises a very big question mark.
Yeah.
And the thing is, would be why now?
Okay, let's conclude this this particular issue, and my director will tell me if we have more time.
So
to
right-
continue
right
with the
now
issue as
I
well.
Just
would
one
be-
point, not
I
on
would
that,
be-
just one point, please. I can see on
Did you get a
Twitter
text
you're
from
saying
the
you're talking about
governor?
No. That issue of William Ruto is very good at evasion is being attributed to me, and it was a senior here
Which one?
who talked about it, that is good at evasion
Oh.
in answering questions.
Oh, no,
so can you correct your
I've-
tweet?
Mark, I would be very curious now, and I think then the journalists owe us then this to help us now understand what happens if the declaration that was made by the judge was based on truth or fact, or if it was based on falsehood. What does that mean? Does
Yeah.
that mean that Sonko then goes back to jail and serves out his remaining 3 months? What does it mean? And then he serves also maybe some extra time for perjury? I don't know. What does it all mean?
That's
Because
the
then you
large-
just
Yeah,
leave us hanging. What does it all mean?
There's still a story there.
There still is a lot. We
Because
don't know.
Sonko has gone to court, or has threatened to go to court.
Yeah.
And he has made his denials. Is that document genuine or not? If so, if it was genuine, was the information on which he was allegedly released early true or not?
And if it
That-
wasn't,
that
what does it mean?
verification
What does
has
it
to
all
be
mean?
done.
Yeah.
Okay, and recourse for him, if indeed it is false, what recourse does he have through the Media Council and otherwise? He's already threatened to go to court.
Okay, one of the options is to actually come to the Complaints Commission, which serves with equal power to a court of law.
Okay.
And once he presents his complaint, the Star will also present
The side of the story.
their side of the story, and the Complaints Commission will make a decision on that. While that is all going on, there's also the many considerations of where the slip-ups have been
Yes.
in terms of the media, where it goes. And for this, I actually want to go back to where we started with Jeff Koinange's show and say that the Media Council is actually developing guidelines. I think they're going to be made available for stakeholders to actually consider. Guidelines which will generate a code that will guide content creators, content producers, those creatives, the entertainers on news platforms and on the media. Because I think that is an area where it's just gone haywire. And it needs a bit of, some guidelines so that, people don't abuse the platform. The media themselves don't abuse the platform.
As you speak about
so that is coming.
Macharia, I know you have your thoughts about more regulation. Could you speak on that?
Yes, I've heard about additional guidelines being developed. But I had a query, is the problem lack of guidelines, or is the problem our inability to enforce existing guidelines? I am always for less rather than more regulation.
Okay.
And I am also not for guidelines which may try to impose some uniformity on how the media operates and take away the rights to do things the way you want to do it. But yes, but I'm not saying we don't have a problem. We do have a problem. And I think the one which has been flagged on and on again is the FM radio, the morning talk shows and 5 o'clock talk shows.
Yes.
A lot of objectionable content there. But that can actually be dealt within existing guidelines if we enforce them.
But Macharia, realize these people do not even consider or want to consider themselves as journalists. So every time we flash the code of conduct, they actually say, no, we are actually not journalists. We are creatives, we are entertainers, we are comedians. So here's the reason why we may actually just pick out aspects of this and something else that speaks directly to the function that they play, that then now we can actually probably put a name on and not pick all the code of conduct for journalism, but really it's about all of that.
I used to appear on some of these talk shows in Nation FM.
Yeah.
With Angela Ngwenye and others.
Were you the comedian?
No, not the comedian. I used to be called as a guest. Jimmy Gatho, Angela. And sometimes they would turn to me and say, you journalists. And I tell them, hey, wait a minute. As long as you are here in this studio hosting a show, you are a journalist. And you must abide by a certain code.
That speaks to how people get into the newsroom in the first place. Because in fact, I've always that there are people, a pool in the newsroom that has come from college, and they have been not only taught about how to write news, but also the ethics of journalism.
Yes.
Then there's somebody else who has come to TV because they look good. Maybe
not my case. Not my case.
Okay.
I went through Tangaza.
Others, come to the radio station because they have a deep voice and they speak in this accent that they picked up somewhere. And they, within a short time, you've seen them reading news on TV, and then the next thing they're out in the field with a microphone, doing small things like Vox Pop. And that's just how they get into it. Before long, they are conducting themselves as journalists. It is okay to self-train as a journalist. There's no problem with that. Absolutely. But the issue of ethics is something that must be enforced. Even if there are no additional guidelines, there should at least be a rule that anybody who walked in here from wherever, if you don't want to be taught about how to interview somebody, at least take a class in ethics. Because that is the one thing that is really lacking amongst the radio DJs.
Really quick, there's something I really need us to cover.
Then all these other journalists that have emerged, we call them influencers and social media people.
Absolutely.
Because they have a lot of
clout.
Clout. They shape a lot of opinion. They're having a lot of followers, and they have channels like on what is it? This other
Instagram.
thing. Called Instagram. Not the other one. It's called what?
YouTube,
the one
Facebook,
where it deletes
whatever.
everything. You whatever. They have channels.
Snap. Is it Snap?
Telegram. Telegram
Yeah.
channels and all that.
Yeah.
And they've got huge followings, and they break news and all that. And they break news about people who have died, and maybe it's incorrect and all that. Yeah. So I think just a point that as we maybe moderate and come up with guidelines, also to think about that space and how we can all agree on some standard of behavior.
Okay.
So long as you have a certain
that's actually the working, and we want people to look at it.
That's a tricky one.
Yeah,
But
tricky because across the world nobody knows exactly how to tame them.
It is a problem, but it is tricky.
But it's good to have something that somebody can refer to. And I'd like even just those content creators to actually look at those guidelines or the code that we're going to end up with as something that also protects them from getting into trouble, from getting into cases of defamation, misinformation, disinformation. you know, getting sued left, right, and center. Because then, you know, when they have it, then they know, if I go beyond here, I'm going to get in trouble.
There's some risks.
So look at it from a positive perspective. There's one last thing that Media Council is doing, because I think it's one of the origins of the biggest problems, the reason why even members of the public cannot complain, is that they have very little information on what the media should do for them, of what to expect of the media. So we are doing media literacy forums across counties, in every space that we can find.
Yes.
We literally just sit down with members of the public and tell them, this is what you should expect of the media. So if you hear content like this, you have a place that you can complain. You can complain to the Complaints Commission, or you can complain someplace else, such that the media begins to actually look at what it is that they are broadcasting. Is it really suitable content? Or is it just a platform where they give people space to abuse each other?
All right, and thank you for not abusing anyone in this show, and especially myself. I invited some feedback, and my producer and my director will advise on whether we can continue, because we're really fast spent on time. But there's one thing that perhaps we can carry that forward. It was an issue about a young man, a former criminal who has been, she will advise me, I'm still listening, yes, a former criminal. Beyond the Scar was a show on KTN by Grace Kuria, and this young man, Boniface Kimanyano Ayoti, you know, talked about his former life where he used to sell female body parts and make money from that. But he's reformed now. Let's just listen to a piece of that.
Day, niliingizwa kwa grupu katakata madem matiti. Unaona?
Umesema?
Matiti
Kata madem.
Yeah. Unaenda Isili unapewa kuna kadau kangine kanajita flexa kakudoza. Sasa demu akiwa na pimples, yani unaenda tao. Anatao hiyo koinaga. Hata ilifika time mazee ilifika paka mademu alikuwa anaogopanga. Kwa sababu unamwambia okay, uko smart. Uko smart ka break.
And that's just a snippet of the show on KTN. And the reason we bring this up is because we find many former criminals, people who have reformed. And there's a question that was posed by one contributor here frequently, and that's Gadara, whether the media house in question should give up this person who was confessing to some crime in the past. They have reformed, and this young man, I believe, is now changing lives, helping the youth to turn to positive, decisions in life. So really quick, and I'll start with the Media Council perspective on this first, because you're the regulator and you oversee this. Are there any guidelines to this?
Does anyone have evidence of what he's claiming to have done? Because then they could sue using that. I mean, if I know it is you who did it, and you were never taken to court or charged for it,
Perhaps
I would
a
still
victim or a relative of a victim.
Yeah, either of those. I would still say you could. But again, do we also know, are we sure whether he has really reformed?
Okay.
Are we sure? Yeah. We don't know. I mean, this was on TV. You can't even say you're protecting sources.
Yes.
Because you've showed his face, you've given his name. Really?
Is it upon the media house to hand him over to authorities?
No.
But let me put it this way. As an editor, if somebody comes up to me with such a story, before putting him on any show or writing any story, it is to investigate. Is he telling you the truth?
Yeah.
Is he of right mind? Is there a record anywhere? He has to give me dates and places. Is there a record anywhere, even within our own library or within police records, where such crimes were
Such as Onyancha's story.
reported?
Yes.
Yes.
I will not go on air before I have established.
Those.
Once I establish that, then I can go on air. But it is not for me to report him out to the police. I assume the police are watching
Or listening.
and they will be interested in coming and arresting this guy. And he knows that when he comes on TV, the next thing is that he should be answering questions in the police station.
Yes. You're keen on youth policy. What of the side of the positive, changing life transformation that can inspire other youth?
I'm all for inspiration and reform and change, but I think that has to be authenticated and verified so that then you're certain that you don't have an ongoing threat to society. Because if you have somebody just declaring that I'm now healed,
Reformed.
I am now reformed, there is no social worker who has verified that, there is no youth worker who has backed that up. He's not coming here in a setup of a certain community group. You know, he's here alone in the studio.
there hasn't
I
been,
would be concerned to check.
And there hasn't been justice for the
And
victims,
there hasn't been
if there were
justice.
victims.
There is there is a process to healing. There's a process
Yes.
where you take accountability for the mistakes that you did, where you pay for the mistakes that you made. You know, if you need to serve some jail time, you confess. You understand? If the judge is persuaded that you have reformed sufficiently, they might give you a lenient sentence. But there's a process to arriving at a point where you say, I am now a fully fledged reformed person who can function properly in society.
And this story was also done by Ebru TV in 2018, so it's not just
but,
KTN.
you know, again, with the competition for space and for
eyeballs.
audience, we should never lose the responsibility still of verifying some of these things. Some of these people could just, maybe they are looking for something by coming on air, attention and so on. You know, there was some people who are leading a very murderous gang in Kenya a few years ago, and suddenly the police were catching up with them, and suddenly they say they have all joined a church, you know. And you wonder now, this church, where is the doctrine? Which Trinity do they teach and so on? You have an ex-convict now who has been in the news recently, calling himself the general commander of his army, being very notorious in insulting people, telling them how useless they are. And again, you can see this guy, he runs a church, but you wonder, did he really change from his ways? And so we give a lot of audience to these people. There is somebody who runs a cult, a big one in this country, who calls himself a prophet. And you know, nobody, we even give him that title. I remember one time when we were in the newspaper I used to work, I called him self-declared. And he sent a big entourage to the newsroom to say, what do you mean self-declared? And I said, but who declared you? And we had this exchange, and it wasn't very pleasant. But I think we should stop being sometimes gullible, and the people just manufacture names and say, I am prophetess, so and so.
All right. In conclusion, and then I'll get to something that we have to, you know, pay
I'm also
respects to a
concerned
party.
about the level of description of his crimes. Looking at it, if I was a young person and I'm looking for, if you like, stardom, I'm listening to this guy and literally learning from him how to do certain crimes. So I'm thinking about the level of at which he's influencing people negatively. Much as he's saying, you know, I reformed, but this is what I used to do. I'd, you know, slit their throats and cut this and remove this. And, you know, there are those young people who may not have the discernment in their minds as they listen to this gentleman.
Yes.
And they're looking at him and they're thinking, you know what, if at one point I want to get onto TV, this is what I'm going to do.
You know, say.
Yes, you know, that kind of a thing. So we want to also be careful to what degree do we describe those crimes that they claim to have, you know, done, and think about also our audiences and what our audiences are learning from what they're hearing or what they're seeing, looking at the person. You know, it's something that we really need to worry about.
Okay, we really need to wrap up, but I need us to pay our respects to the departed popular radio host and sports presenter Mohamed Juma Njuguna, who was laid to rest this past Saturday afternoon at Karioko Cemetery, Nairobi County. Juma passed away on Saturday morning after long illness at the Nairobi hospital. His sterling career, there he is, which dates back to nearly early 70s, saw him mature in broadcasting as a qualified radio presenter, TV producer, newscaster. Earlier that day, his friends, fans and colleagues took to social media to pay tribute to the broadcasting legend in the country. Kenyans will remember Juma for his prowess in Kiswahili commentary, which saw him awarded with the Head of State Commendation in 2010. He was recognized for his exemplary contribution to broadcasting and soccer commentary. Now may his soul rest in peace. And really quick, for those who probably interacted with him.
I think this is a reminder that Kenyan journalism has produced some very, very great figures who could hold their own anywhere in the world. I think Mohamed Juma Njuguna was a legend, not just with his football commentaries, but generally on everything he did on radio, whether it is news, whether it is entertainment, and of course his soccer commentaries are legendary. And there are many like him, I think, who maybe did not get the recognition they deserved. It's unfortunate that many of them served at a time when there was only one radio station, so they were not in a position to bargain for their worth, but they are there, and I think we must honor them. I would hope that as a journalist fraternity, the Media Council, the Editors Guild, the KUJ, and all others can come together and think of how can we honor these people. Some of them are still with us,
Yes.
some are retired, some are still active, but I think there is a lot they can do in terms of training the younger generation, mentoring, and just standing up as examples of excellence.
In journalism. Christine?
Fantastic, yeah. Every time I think about Mohamed Juma Njuguna, I just think about how he was able to fit in whichever slot in the media. I mean, you'd hear him reading news, and then after some time you hear him with a football match, and he would completely transform himself from this very serious voice that was delivering the news to you. And you'd think to yourself, wow, that was a nice bulletin. I have understood,
Yes.
and it was clear. And you know, he gave it, the way he wanted it delivered, the way the news ought to be delivered. And
Yes.
then when he went into, sports commentating, you hear the playful Juma, and you think, is this the same person that I was listening to? So I really admired that bit about him. Thinking about that, maybe we, as the media fraternity, people who've served in journalism as myself, I'm thinking maybe for some of these people that we need to honor, we need to start having a hall of fame somewhere,
Yeah.
which we can actually display these people, put pictures of them, and a little story narrative, around them, that people can actually go. How about having a news museum? Put in the big stories and put in the broadcasters who actually made such a big difference. People like Mohamed Juma Njuguna and others.
Christine Goko.
Don't make me that old. I'm not yet there.
Well, you'll be there. You're one of the
The
greats.
thing that probably hasn't come out very clearly regarding Mohamed Juma his contribution, he left his mark. He was very authoritative in what he did, and he believed in himself. He wouldn't go there wondering what does the producer think and so on. He would just get in there and do his work the way he did it.
Yeah.
And he came from this generation of broadcasters that really shaped the scene, the radio scene in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And for that, we say fare thee well.
Yes.
And we'll see you in future.
And may his soul rest in peace. I don't know if you interacted with him.
I didn't, but of course, I've heard this, I think, all week. I think he was a great man.
Yes.
And condolences to the family. I like the idea to honor the ones who are still there when they're still here, and maybe having that, hall of fame, or museum or something, so that, this is for posterity.
Definitely, definitely. And this is a good point to end it. That is the show, and I believe I have the blessing of my producer, Rosalie, and my director, Arnold. Thank you, Lydia, Matthew, thank you, Bwana Charles Kirich, and thank you to Christine Goko and Bwana Masharia Gaido. I don't know, I'll leave you with this clip. I don't know if this will make it to the Hall of Fame, but this is a story from our very own Nairobi News that I picked it, where a frustrated Inoro TV journalist was recently forced to slap a person who intruded on his work while he was on field assignment. As per the video that you're about to see, which was widely shared on social media, Charles Gikonga of Inoro TV, if we can see it any moment now, is seen going about his business. That is doing this PTC while doing a piece of camera with curious onlookers. There you go in the background. Then the slap happened. I believe you have seen it right there. There you go. This isn't the first time, of course, this has happened in a PTC. Look at him. This is a frustrated man. But yeah, he probably will end up in the Hall of Fame later on. This is a frustration. He stuck to his PTC and to his story, and he delivered it. Thank you for watching Press Pass. My name is Mark Masai. Bwana Gekonga, endelea na kazi.